3 whales caught in an Arctic ice jam are grabbing page 1. Even Ronald Reagan phoned in his support. Crisis in Yugoslavia. Once a model of communist reform, it's in danger of becoming the next Lebanon. And on diary, it's the real thing, a new use for a famous fluid. This engine goes better with Coke. The Journal with Bill Cameron and Paul Griffin.
Good evening. Our top story tonight, the disarray inside the Liberal election campaign. As Peter Mansbridge reported earlier on The National, some key Liberal power brokers think John Turner is losing the election, and they've talked about forcing him to resign.
The National reported that just days before the election was called, Turner's Quebec lieutenant, Raymond Garneau, told him to quit. Since then, party pollster Martin Goldfarb reportedly told Turner all was lost. And many leading party strategists and candidates have called for an emergency meeting with their leader.
One of the people who helped Peter Mansbridge put that story together is Don Newman, senior parliamentary editor for CBC TV News. Don, we're dealing with some senior Liberal names here, Turner loyalists, Andre Ouellette, Herb Gray. What pushed those men into asking for an emergency meeting?
Two things really, Bill. One was the CBC poll that we broadcast last Sunday evening, which showed that the Liberals were not only running behind the Conservatives, which they've come to accept, but also running behind the NDP and running badly behind the NDP in some areas, and showing that John Turner, as a preference by Canadians for Prime Minister, was a very, very poor third behind Ned Broadbent and Brian Mulroney, below 10% in some of the questions asked. That was one thing. The second thing was the leak of a Liberal abortion policy that apparently Turner was planning to announce, a policy that would allow abortion on demand for the first 22 weeks of a pregnancy. Some of the Liberals thought it was crazy to announce an abortion policy during a campaign when the government hadn't done that. That would make the Liberal Party the target of anti-abortion groups rather than the Conservatives. And finally, a feeling that when Turner has been campaigning across the country and the MPs have run into him, that he's been dismissing the polls, not taking them very seriously, and telling people that everything's going fine.
So what was to happen at that meeting? What message were they going to give him?
Well, they were going to give him that he shouldn't go around announcing an abortion policy during the debate. Apparently, the plan originally was to announce the abortion policy during the women's section of the debate on television next week. His principal secretary, Peter Connolly, had leaked the intention earlier in the week. It's also not clear exactly what they were going to tell him in terms of his own personal future. Some of them apparently think that Turner should step down at this late date in the middle of a campaign. Others not clear what that would mean to the party in terms of how it would continue a campaign without a leader.
Well, nobody's apparently been able to put that point to John Turner yet, but what kind of future would that lead to for the party? What would happen after John Turner steps down in mid-campaign?
Well, that's very questionable. One of the ideas is to have senior Liberals, former senior Liberals, including Pierre Trudeau, although I don't think Trudeau's been consulted on this bill, people come out and campaign to save the party, to try and save it as a national institution, as a viable political entity. But all of that is in abeyance for the moment because Herb Gray called the Turner campaign plane on Monday, wanted to discuss policy, he said abortion policy, suggested a meeting. Turner said he'd get back to him, never got back to him, and so everything went on hold.
So you've got senior figures in the Liberal Party calling up the leaders saying, we have to meet right now, and the leader doesn't respond.
And they're mad. And as you pointed out, it's these 5 MPs, as much as anybody, who've held Turner together during the 4 years since the last election defeat, who fought off caucus revolts for him, and who really feel that they deserve the leader's ear at a crucial moment like this. They're very disappointed that they didn't get the meeting, but for the moment it's on hold. After the debates, it could be resuscitated. It could be back on the burner again.
If John Turner isn't talking to these men right now, who is he talking to?
Well, he's talking to the people as he goes around campaigning, and he's talking to a man named Doug Kirkpatrick on the campaign plane, and also Peter Connolly, his principal secretary, who's on the campaign plane. He's apparently not talking to his senior strategists on the ground. He's talking to his office in Ottawa. The strategists have to get in touch with the office, and the office has to get in touch with the plane, and it's kind of a pass-along message system. It's really a very unusual thing for a national political party in the 3rd week of a major national election campaign to be in this kind of isolated state, with Turner out on the West Coast and the strategists here in central Canada really not talking directly to each other.
Briefly, Don, what are Liberal pollsters telling the Liberals now?
Well, the Liberals aren't doing the kind of polling the other parties are, but one thing that the MPs have been told is that if they could get 2 or 3 more points in the poll, they would start winning some split ridings. That 2 or 3 more points in the poll could mean an extra 30 ridings for them. That's one reason why they're so upset.
Don Newman, thanks very much. Good night.
Good night, Bill.
At the northernmost tip of Alaska, where it's already deep winter, 3 young California gray whales are caught in a desperate drama. They waited too long to head south, and now they're trapped in the ice. Their only air supply, a few small holes in the ice, kept open by people concerned for their welfare. It's a story that's inspired worldwide sympathy, from the Inuit who have given each whale a special name to U.S. President Ronald Reagan, who yesterday phoned encouragement to people involved in the rescue operation. An operation that's growing more desperate the longer the whales are trapped. The whales got trapped as the ice closed around them near Port Barrow almost 2 weeks ago. They were trying to migrate to warmer waters. Now temperatures have dropped to 20 below and the ice is getting thicker. Rescuers have cut breathing holes for the animals, but their snouts are worn raw from the jagged ice around the edges. Hour by hour, they grow weaker. And it's not just bad weather that has rescuers frustrated. A National Guard helicopter is trying to pull a hovercraft icebreaker to Point Barrow to cut a path so the whales can get to open water. But crews have had problems getting the hovercraft mobile. And even if the path is broken, biologists wonder if the whales will follow the trail of broken ice to freedom.
In Barrow, Alaska tonight, one of the whale watchers, whale tenders, worriers, Cindy Lowry of Greenpeace. Cindy, how are they doing?
Well, I think they're doing a lot better today than a couple of days ago. When I went out to see them on Monday, one of them was wheezing pretty badly, and another little one was coming up and resting its chin on the ice, like it was really needing some time to rest. And yesterday and today, they seem a lot better. The wheezing is gone, and they seem a little more energetic.
What accounts for that?
I don't think anyone knows. You know, there's been some talk about that. The reason that the one was wheezing might be because the timing is a little off because it's tired, and usually they close the blowhole right before they go under the water, and the timing's just a little off and a little bit of water's getting in there. So maybe they're just adjusting and, you know, getting a little rest once in a while.
But you can't see much of these whales. I suppose there could be damage, they could be hurt, you could be wrong about this, I guess.
Well, there's always that possibility, but just, you know, a veterinarian also went out today and took another look, and he felt the same, that they had improved from yesterday.
Any idea of how much time you've got now?
It's real hard to know. I mean, the fact that they are looking pretty good under the circumstances, you know, they could be another few days. It seems like everyone's been saying since, you know, this past weekend, it's a few more days that they have, and they just keep hanging in there.
But there are all these variables you have to work with, I guess. What would it be? Well, water temperature, wind, the movement of the ice. Things change.
Yeah, they can, and fortunately we've got about the best wind conditions that you can ask for. They're coming from the east, and it's a little stronger today, and there's more open water than there was over the weekend, and now the lead is like less than 5 miles.
So how much room have these 3 animals got to maneuver now?
They've got 2 holes, basically. There was some work yesterday to open up another couple holes, but it seems when I was out there today that it's iced over a little bit, so it's sort of back to the 2 holes. There's one large one and there's a smaller one, and they're, you know, keep trying to enlarge the larger one.
Everybody I've been talking to about this has been throwing great ideas around. One of the obvious ones is, why aren't you using dynamite?
Well, when you talk about explosives with whales, there's, you know, a lot of uncertainty as far as damaging their echolocation, and I mean, if we hurt their echolocating sound capacity, they may not make it home.
Now, what's the problem with the hovercraft? Why isn't it there right now?
Well, it's on its way. It left again about an hour ago. I guess the problem last night was when it took off, there was too much fuel, so they had to offload about 70 tons of fuel during the night, and it did take off again, though, about an hour ago, so we're now expecting it hopefully in the morning or midday tomorrow.
How confident are you that it's the thing to do the trick?
Well, I think if we weren't confident that it could do the trick, we wouldn't all be, you know, pushing for it to get here and trying to do everything we can to keep the holes open and everything for them.
I just have this impression of Arctic ice as being completely monumental, and it seems unlikely that you could fly something in, drop it on the ice, and have it pound out enough of an escape route for these animals.
Well, actually, the ice is about 15 inches thick, and once this thing is put down on the ice, the rotors kick in, and that's what churns up the ice. And when I flew out today to see where the lead was, the closest open water, it's pretty smooth ice out there. There aren't any huge ice ridges, at least right now, that it looks like it'd have to go through.
Greenpeace, of course, started with whales, and you've sure got a lot of attention with these whales, but I guess it must be ironic for you to look at all of this publicity and then consider where whales are in the great scheme of life at the moment.
Well, it's encouraging that all these different entities involved have a respect for whales and that they feel they're important enough to, pull all stops and try to rescue them. So that's encouraging, and we've certainly got a lot of support nationwide and worldwide on this one.
You must have been spending half your life on the phone and half your life on the ice recently.
Yeah, it's a little more calm actually being out there with the whales.
So when do you think you're going to get these whales loose and life can go back to normal for them and you?
Well, hopefully tomorrow. I'm not sure if the barge is going to try to go through the night or not, but hopefully it will get here sometime tomorrow. And if the wind conditions stay the same, they seem to think that they can do it in a few hours.
And then they head south?
Then they head south.
And so do you. Thank you.
Thanks.
The 3 trapped whales in Alaska have captured the world's attention, but their plight is not all that uncommon. Often the threat to whales comes not from nature, but from humans. Earlier this fall, the Journal reported on the exploits of John Leon. In Newfoundland, this professor of animal behavior is known as the Whale Man for efforts to free whales caught in fishermen's nets.
This work with whales has enhanced John Leon's reputation as one of Canada's foremost whale experts. Professor Leon, you seem to spend half your life chasing after trapped whales, so this really isn't that unusual, or is it?
No, I don't think it's too unusual. Whales get in difficulty almost every day of the year. And for the past decade or so, there's been a practice of trying to conserve them and build numbers. And in many stocks, this has worked. So you have semi-recovered whale populations, greater numbers of animals, and they're coming into an ocean where there's all kinds of hazards. So on a day-to-day basis, we find a fair number of them getting in trouble.
I thought whales were pretty smart. Shouldn't these guys have been able to figure out that they were too close to the ice?
Well, I think they are smart. Probably not as smart as some people believe, but they are an intelligent mammal for sure. There's a bit of a conflict, I think, for many whales. One of the characteristics of the edge of ice is that it's a very productive zone. And so there's a lot of food there, whether they're feeding at the planktonic level or whether they're feeding on fish. There's a lot of food that's available to them. So if they're real hungry and they're trying to maximize the amount of food they can catch, they probably exploit the edge of ice.
So these whales took a risk, took a gamble.
Yeah, and it may be that what I've heard on the media is that they are young animals, and these animals might be best advised to take that risk. The population of gray whales spends its summer in the northern waters feeding, and then it goes down to the southern waters and spends time there courting, mating, calving, and so on. And if you're part of a non-breeding segment in the population, maybe you're best advised to stay up there and eat as much as you can. So you might spend a little more time of the feeding season north and thereby encounter a bit more risk.
Now, the reporters on the scene are painting a picture of 3 frightened animals, probably in pain, probably under a lot of stress, probably at death's door. Now, what's your assessment?
I'm sure the animals, after being entrapped for a period of time, are not in great condition. There's a number of things that stress them. Just the physical confinement to a small body of water probably is a major stress for these animals who are used to bottom feeding, they're roaming great areas, and so on. The second stress is the fact that they're captive and held in a very small space with other animals, which they may not like, which they may not know, which they may be competing with in one way or another. And the third thing is, there's a tremendous amount of interest in this. I don't know how many times I've seen it on the media. And every time I've seen a picture, there's people standing right next to the hole that the animals are caught in. So that proximity to man is probably an additional stress.
Does all that mean that these animals are now very vulnerable?
I think they are vulnerable. They, you know, once you're caught in that body of ice, you're subject to, you know, really powerful forces. There's no easy way, even with helicopters and icebreakers, to move that amount of ice and move the animals out of there.
At the same time, they would have a lot of stamina. They're big animals.
They are large animals. Here in Newfoundland, every year we get large animals of a number of species caught in ice. Our mortality depends a lot on the size of the whale and the species, but overall I would guess we're something at about 25%. So I think that the prognosis for the animals is probably, just based on our experience here, is probably pretty good.
You know, a lot of people have seen pictures of you chasing around in small boats, unsnagging whales, and everybody I know who's seen that says, boy, what a terrific way to make a living. Why is it that people are so fascinated by these creatures?
I think we perceive them as being a lot like us. If you think of the popular literature on whales, they're said to talk a lot, they communicate a lot, that's like us. They live in close social groups, well, we can relate to that. They're supposed to be very intelligent, well, we appreciate species like that. So there's a perception that they're a lot like us. They are an interesting animal. When you get an animal that's, you know, 80 to 100 feet long and weighing 150 tons, that's bound to perk one's curiosity. Some of like the blue whale, is the largest animal that's ever lived, and I'm sure if we all had a chance to see a dinosaur, we would jump at it and go out and look at it. So I suppose the fascination is understandable, but there are some curiosities about it.
Dr. Leon, thanks very much. Good night.
Good night.
When the Journal returns, I'll have the diary and a story about an unexpected windfall for Beethoven buffs, the premiere of a new symphony more than 160 years after his death. The Journal Diary for October 19th. Another in those new convenient labor-saving gizmos the banks would like you to start using for their own good. This one is the debit card. It's a credit card that puts the bite on your account right away. The banks think you'll love this, and they know they will. But some critics have doubts.
2086, you're going to pay with your Royal Bank card?
When you use a debit card, the money is instantly, electronically whisked out of your bank account into the stores. It's being billed as the latest high-tech convenience. The Royal Bank is the first of the major chartered banks to try it out on consumers at selected stores in London, Ontario. Apparently, some customers think it's neat, a novelty. But there's a cost of being technologically with it, 25 cents for every transaction. Economist Jim Savory doesn't think at that price debit cards will be a big hit.
It does seem as though the consumer is paying twice in a sense. The consumer is using a debit card to in effect do the bank's work for the bank and then is charged for the privilege of doing so.
Right now, banks spend a lot of money shuffling paper, checks and credit card slips. If widely used, debit cards would eventually cut those costs. The London experiment is part of a 10-year plan to convince consumers that debit cards are good for them. Cheaper electronic banking would help the bank's bottom line, but would the savings be passed on to you, the consumer?
I certainly think that would happen, but what the situation is going to be then, I can't forecast. I can't forecast how well customers are going to like this service.
I think the long-term game plan is to increase profits by charging for the service.
The Royal hopes you'll like paying for the privilege of having the money pulled out of your account faster, and the other Canadian banks are watching very closely, with interest, you might say. Lily Cups, the styrofoam people, have decided not only to keep your coffee hot, but to do it safer. Up till now, the company that makes a quarter of all foam food containers in Canada made their foam with chlorofluorocarbons, the major culprit in damaging the Earth's ozone layer. Now, Lily is switching to a new process, using a different type of gas it says doesn't harm the atmosphere. Last month, the Journal documented the feverish destruction of Brazil's Amazon rainforest. Now, after intense international pressure, the Brazilian government has vowed to slow development, reversing a 20-year drive to conquer the jungle. The government acted after finding 6,000 man-made fires burning in a single day. Scientists say those fires are pumping huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, contributing to a dangerous warming of the climate known as the greenhouse effect. Fire hydrants, rather the lack of fire hydrants, have resulted in higher insurance rates for people who live in rural Canada. That's because insurance underwriters feel country homes are at higher risk should a fire occur. But now a group of Ontario firemen may have poured cold water on that theory. Canadians who live in rural areas pay at least $150 a year more for fire insurance than do their city neighbors. That's because there are no fire hydrants in the country, no constant source of water for fighting fires. But that idea may be about to change, thanks to a recent test by 8 area fire departments in rural Ontario. These men, like Deputy Fire Chief Bob Miner, want to show they don't need fire hydrants to fight fires.
We're trying to prove that we can pump 600 gallons per minute for a period of 2 hours.
Closely watching the firefighters were several insurance people, including Dave Cowie, an underwriter.
We're here to see if the municipality can supply the water that's equal to fire hydrants, and we'll be able to class them the same way as a hydrant-protected area.
For 2 hours, the pressure was on to keep the water supply up. To do that, a tanker shuttled back and forth to a nearby town, bringing in water to fill up portable tanks. 2 hours later, firefighters had passed the test with water to spare. They'd pumped 72,000 gallons of water, 3 times the output of one fire hydrant. It seems the underwriters are convinced. They'll be preparing a report that could reduce the insurance rates for the 8 municipalities involved. If that happens, tests like this one will likely take place in rural communities across Canada and may lead to lower rural insurance rates on a national scale. 161 years ago, as Beethoven was on his deathbed, a new symphony lay sketched on his desk. 5 years ago, remnants of it were discovered in Berlin and painstakingly pieced together. And finally, last night, the surviving movement of Beethoven's 10th Symphony had its world premiere in London. This is the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra rehearsing for last night's performance. And here's a short sample. A British scientist thinks that there are better things to do with a bottle of Coca-Cola than actually drink it. Instead, he's been feeding it regularly to his automobile. When Jack Schofield takes his car out for a spin, he not only checks that his gas tank is full, he also makes sure that his engine is topped up with Coca-Cola. Schofield and a partner in Hungary have developed a new lubricant based on the soft drink, which he uses instead of the usual motor oil. He says it's more economical and dramatically reduces the friction that causes engine breakdown.
The Coca-Cola contains this phosphoric acid, which can be deposited as a lubricant on the moving surfaces. The sugar caramelizes and also acts as a lubricant, and it's ready-made, as you might say.
Schofield says that his Coke lubricant is thicker and stickier than conventional formulas. That means it coats and separates moving parts better so that the engine performs more efficiently and lasts longer. Road tests in Hungary showed cars still running after 500,000 miles, using half the oil previously required.
The engine will probably outlast the car itself.
The Coca-Cola company hasn't shown much interest in Schofield's research, but an American company that manufactures chemical additives is considering marketing the product and trying to prove that things go better with Coke. And that's the Journal Diary.
When we return, Yugoslavia. It used to be the most successful communist state in post-war Europe, and now it has reached the brink of social and economic collapse. West, Yugoslavia has been the example of communism that works. It's freer and more prosperous than the rest of its East European cousins, and it has successfully resisted the control of Moscow. But beneath all that, there are the wounds of centuries of ethnic conflict, and this month, those wounds have been torn open. The truce among the nation's many cultures has been shattered. The government so far has been powerless to stop the growing protest against its handling of the crisis, a crisis a lot of people worry will disintegrate into chaos. The Journal's London correspondent, Anne McMillan, has prepared this report on the roots of today's discontent in Yugoslavia.
Never in its post-war history have protesters taken to the streets of Yugoslavia in such numbers. Ethnic conflict and economic chaos have led to a wave of unrest which is shaking the country to its very foundations. Most of Yugoslavia's problems are the legacy of its modern-day founder, Josip Broz, the redoubtable Tito. Tito was the dashing hero who led underground resistance to the Nazi occupation in the Second World War. He was the tough-talking communist who split with Stalin and kept Yugoslavia outside the Soviet bloc. It was his iron fist which ensured the country's diverse and quarrelsome ethnic groups stayed in line. Tito designed a federal system of government to prevent the domination of any one of Yugoslavia's 6 main nationalities. In 1946, he created 6 republics: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Serbia. All have an equal say in the way Yugoslavia is run. The Serbians, as the largest ethnic group, got the biggest republic. To ensure they didn't get too powerful, Tito further subdivided them. In 1974, he set up the autonomous regions of Vojvodina and Kosovo. It's Kosovo that's at the center of recent ethnic strife. The Serbs regard this area as the cradle of their ancient nation. Here, in the Middle Ages, Serbian kings were crowned. But today, Serbs make up just 10% of the population of Kosovo. They say they've been forced out of their homeland by Albanians, who are now the dominant ethnic group in the region. Defying a government ban on demonstrations, Serbs all over Yugoslavia have taken to the streets to demand that Kosovo be returned to the Republic of Serbia.
The Serbs feel particularly that they have had a bad deal in recent years, especially in the last years of Tito's rule.
Christopher Svic